I remember exactly where I was when the Parkland shooting happened. I was in my office at USCJ, and it was an ordinary afternoon for me until my cell phone rang. It was my youngest daughter, Alana. She said, "Abba, I'm okay." And I was really confused. "You're okay? What happened?" "Well, there was a school shooting." "There was a school shooting?" She says, "No, it was in Florida." And I remember something that I wish I didn't remember at that moment, which was my first thought was relief, because she was in New Jersey. And then I was even more confused. Why are you calling me to tell me that you're okay about a shooting that took place in Parkland, Florida? And she was a wreck when she made this phone call. And the reason was, because of USY and of Camp Ramah, she knew people who were there. And so this shooting, for her, was no longer theoretical. It was real. And that moment never left me. Included amongst the victims of the Parkland shooting was a USYer that was known to us at USCJ and within the movement. Not to mention about 12 other students who survived that day. By 2018, shootings in the United States had become horrifyingly familiar. Since Columbine, they had begun to create something very dangerous: numbness. And I never allow myself to become numb. But I did become very frustrated. Every time, in the US anyway, the same response: thoughts and prayers, thoughts and prayers, thoughts and prayers, thoughts and prayers, but no action, no legislative actions. And it always seems to me that this response was nonsense. There are sensible laws that could protect children while still respecting the Second Amendment. But political courage rarely follows moral clarity. In Canada, things are different. Not perfect, but different. And this week reminds us why that difference matters. This week, violence entered the small northern British Columbia town of Tumbler Ridge, a community 2,500 people where everybody knows everybody. An 18-year-old attacker killed members of her own family and then opened fire at Tumbler Ridge Secondary School, killing students and teachers and injuring many others before dying by suicide. And across Canada, people are asking a question that Americans have asked too often: how could this happen here? Even in a country where guns are harder to obtain and violence is far less prevalent, this week is a reminder that it can happen, and it does happen. The Torah understands this reality. Immediately after Sinai, we get mishpatim, not prayer, not theology, but law. Ve'ela ha-mishpatim, these are the laws. Rashi zeroes in on the vav, the word and in so doing, he connects what follows in the parsha, the laws, to Sinai. Civil responsibility, in other words, is also sacred work. The Torah begins with laws about vulnerability, injury, damages, power, responsibility. Because a holy society is not measured by what it believes, but by how it behaves. Again and again in Mishpatim, the Torah commands us not to oppress the stranger, not to mistreat the widow or the orphan, for we know the soul of the stranger. Torah assumes something deeply human, that fear narrows empathy. Violence makes communities want to withdraw, to protect only their own. But the Torah insists on an opposite response. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs taught that the command to protect the stranger reflects Judaism's belief that the experience of vulnerability must lead to responsibility and not to isolation. Fear does not suspend morality. Fear tests morality. This week is also Shabbat Shkalim. Each Israelite was commanded to contribute half a shekel toward the community. Not a full coin, half a coin. The message is simple. No one is whole alone. Rich and poor gave the same amount so that no one could claim ownership over the community. The half shekel is Torah's model of social responsibility. Everyone contributes, everyone belongs, everyone is responsible. Canada does not experience school shootings with the frequency, thank God, of the United States, in part because firearms are tightly regulated. But Canada has not been immune. École Polytechnique in 1989, Nova Scotia in 2020, and now Tumbler Ridge. After tragedies like these, Canada has often responded with collective responsibility, strengthening laws, expanding mental health supports, and community solidarity, as we saw in the BC legislature and the throne speech this week. Not perfectly, but seriously. That instinct echoes Torah. Mishpatim teaches responsibility. Shkalim teaches shared belonging. Together they teach that a society is judged not only by how it prevents violence, but how it responds afterwards. The philosopher Avishai Margalit spoke about the idea of a decent society, a society whose institutions do not humiliate people. The Torah pushes it even further. A decent society protects dignity. A decent society shares responsibility. A decent society refuses to become numb in moments such as these. That was the danger after Parkland. That is the danger now. Not only violence, but numbness. So years ago, Alana called to tell me that she was safe. This week, parents in Tumbler Ridge received a call that would forever change their lives. A small Canadian town will never be the same again. Earlier this week, we shared a statement from the synagogue expressing our grief and solidarity with the people of Tumbler Ridge. We are holding the victims, their families, and the entire community in our prayers. But Jewish tradition teaches that prayer alone, thoughts and prayers, are never enough. Never enough to be the final response to suffering. Prayer opens the heart. Actions sustain the world. The rabbis teach, Gedolat tzedakah shemikarevet et hageula. Great is tzedakah, for it brings closer redemption. So this week, the question that we must ask ourselves is, how will we do more than pray? I encourage you to make a gift to tzedakah in support of Tumbler Ridge to help the students, the families, and educators begin the very long process of healing. Because the half shekel teaches us that healing is a shared responsibility. No one can prepare a broken world alone, but together we can move it more towards decency. And Torah responds as it always does after fear enters human life: protect the vulnerable, share responsibility, refuse numbness, build community toward a more decent society. That is the work of Torah. That is the work that we have as Canadians. That is our work today and every day. May the people of Tumbler Ridge, those who have died, may they find comfort in Olam Haba. May their families be comforted by God, by community, and may we commit not to be numb by this occurrence, and to work together as Canadians to build a more decent society. Shabbat Shalom.